I'm
Totally.
so excited to be here.
Yay. I am too. And I'm super excited to talk to you because, well, for many reasons, but the one that's sort of screaming at me right now is as somebody who has operated kind of in a silo on her own, by herself, like a solo entrepreneur, and now I have a very small team. And we kind of just figure things out as we go. I don't have a lot of formal corporate product experience. I worked with you. I was able to do, what was it, like 3 months of weekly sessions with you, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And I have to say, you truly opened my eyes, not just to project management, not just to product development, but to finding a flow that allows things to go from idea to execution over and over and over again in such a beautiful, clean, and formulaic way. And so I just want to thank you for that. And I'm excited to
Aw.
share you and your knowledge in this time that we have with the other entrepreneurs who are out there kind of fumbling around in the dark, figuring out their way, because I think you can really, really impact and change the way people run their businesses in a beautiful way.
Wow. That's very kind. And I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to do that together. And it's true. It's like stuff, practices, frameworks, things that you could use in everyday life, in running a business, in just establishing like your to-do list for a given day and understanding what's most important versus less important, and then like going forth and doing the most and getting the most value out of whatever you're spending your time on.
Yeah, that's you. That's it. That's everything. It's making every second count. And
Yeah.
yeah. So we sort of dove in and people are like, I think I know what she does. So let's clear the air. Could you share,
Yeah.
a little bit about your background, what you do, and how you got here?
Yeah, totally. So I am a product strategy consultant now. And my career has always been in product management, basically since I almost immediately after I got out of college. But I didn't know that was a thing. Had no idea it was like product manager was a title of somebody that worked in the company. Kind of fell into it. And that's true of a lot of product people I talk to. You end up just like literally falling into it, and there's a need in almost all organizations. And now it's like the hot, position of the day at a company. So I'm very blessed to have found that like a dozen years ago or so. And now I'm living my dream job consulting and doing projects with awesome people like Pua, and just helping organizations be getting, like I said, get the most value out of what they spend their time on, and making sure that they're solving problems that matter for their customers, their users, whoever that might be. Yeah. I can also, is it
Awesome.
helpful if I describe like what product managers do?
Definitely.
Okay. Because most people, I swear to God, my parents still have no clue what I do for a living. I've described this to them so many times. Um, so it's not super familiar to a lot of people, and you can't fault them for that. But product managers are effectively responsible for understanding user market needs, figuring out what problems need to be solved for companies, for clients, for users, etc. And it's usually from a software development standpoint, but product managers exist in hardware too, right? Because at the end of the day, product is responsible for identifying what those needs and problems are, and then writing the business requirements that would be needed to solve those problems, and then working with software engineers, developers, designers, to build a solution that solves those problems at a very basic level. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, it's really about understanding what problems to solve and then prioritizing them in a way that adds incremental value to the experience over time. And then, obviously that all rolls up into things like the product roadmap, and again, establishing those priorities, doing something now versus next versus maybe never. And an overall product strategy that kind of helps to drive a lot of the organizational strategy at the end of the day.
Epic. I love, I'm sitting here like, I'm like, okay, of all the things you taught me, what how much of it could we cram into this
Oh
45
gosh.
minutes?
Yeah, I know. And like
Even,
describing product that way is almost limiting in and of itself because it's so many other things too. But yeah, it's a
but it's
lot.
so helpful too, because yeah, like the whole product space is a little bit ethereal, I think, especially in the service industry
Mm-hmm.
where you're like,
Yep.
what? I don't have a product, but you
Yeah.
do.
Yep.
And
Your
you also
service
have a
is your
client
product.
experience. Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yep. Totally.
Totally. What I love so much about is this the right term? Like agile project management? Is that what we
Yeah.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
worked on together?
Yep.
So that to me is the secret sauce from taking somebody who's full of ideas that like need to really be in the world. They're great ideas, maybe, hopefully.
Yep.
And through this process, you'll find out.
Yep.
And taking them from idea to concept to product, quote unquote, whatever that product might be.
Yep.
Could you share with me, as detailed or non-detailed as you'd like, sort of your, like if someone were to say, hey, I'm full of ideas, but I don't know what to do with them.
Yeah. Yep.
How do they implement this? Where do they start?
Right. It's such a good question. And it's often like the very beginning is usually the step people skip the most. And the first step is really like discovery and validation, like understanding if the things that you think you need or that your users or clients or whomever need are actually things that they need and are worth solving. I'm reading a book called The Crux by Richard Ramelt, and he talks about the crux, like you first need to identify what the like core problem is that you're trying to solve and whether it's feasibly achievable to be solved before anything else happens. And so really like digging in and understanding, validating whether those things that you think you should be working on are indeed stuff that people want you to be working on. So that takes a lot of user research. Data is your best friend. Talking to people, understanding really like where they're falling down, like where they're getting stuck as it relates to whatever, product, service, or whatever technology you're offering them. Validation is the first piece of that. And then through that process, hopefully you've been able to identify like, how can I get the most bang for my buck? What do I need to focus on now? And the name of the game is incremental value delivery, right? So what do I need to do now that gets me the biggest ROI in the most concise amount of time? Like, how do I deliver meaningful value in a shorter period of time? Because you'll build on that, as time goes on and continue to iterate, as we say, make improvements, enhancements, whatever, to the experience or the product that you're delivering. And you rinse and repeat that cycle over and over, and you're constantly validating that those ideas are worth pursuing while you do more execution and keep building the things that you've validated are worthy of being solved.
I love that. I love that for so many reasons. The biggest one is that we don't have to guess what people want. We don't have to guess if this will work. We don't have to guess if it's what they need. All we have to do is ask, right?
Yeah, totally.
Which is
and so many
something
people
that we
skip
find
that
difficult.
step. Yes, which is wild, right? Like, you're like, I know the solution to this problem. You're like, do you? Is that even a good problem? Like, do other people care about that problem? Like, is it just your idea that you think is brilliant? It's so fundamental and seemingly easy, and yet is probably one of the biggest pieces people miss because we get so attached and fixated on this idea of a solution to something in our heads before we even know for sure that it's worth pursuing.
Totally. It's very emotional, I think, because you have this like, a lot of people have been brewing on their ideas for a while too, right?
Totally.
So to hear something that you told me over and over again, I mean, you told me a lot of things that really stuck with me, but data is not emotional.
Yeah.
Data is simply something that you can use to make a decision on.
Yep.
Make adjustments, iterate, test, get feedback. Like, it might not be the right order, but like,
that is 100%, 100%. And like, you're not always going to have data, like quantitative data, but qualitative data, anecdotal feedback, that is data in and of itself. And so the more diverse types of data that you can kind of combine and aggregate and synthesize to make those decisions, the better off you're going to be. Like, the more hedged your bets are going to be, the less and the greater the chance that the value that you think you're delivering is what you think it's going to be.
That's awesome. I'm curious, in your experience, as you collect this feedback and data and sort of make decisions on what data is useful, what data you should probably utilize in order to make these changes or not. How, like, we can ask one person, 3 people, 5 people, 10 people, 100 people, and you'll get, things that you can pull out that are patterns. You'll get individual pieces of information that maybe one person thought of that was brilliant that nobody else thought of. What is your process on figuring out how to utilize the feedback and the data to make those decisions?
Man, that's a loaded question. It's such a good one because you're right. And like sometimes you only hear the loudest people. Like sometimes you only get feedback from the people who are the loudest, but there's good ideas and good feedback brewing from, the silent ones too. So you really have to work to get a diversity of perspectives as you analyze feedback. So I think number one, that's important. But something is always better than nothing. So if you really can only talk to 5 people, go talk to those 5 people, And then like you said, I think identifying patterns and trends, those are usually good places to start because they're self-identifiers of maybe the biggest problem spaces that exist and therefore maybe where you have the most ROI.
Brilliant. So there's something that we talked about. No, don't worry. We talked about this together, and it was prioritizing the things that need to be done based on ROI, based on the things that are going to have the most impact in the shortest amount of time that get you incrementally closer to that big goal.
Yeah.
Sometimes the priorities that we feel like are important may shift. Which in our experience, I think ultimately would shift the end product altogether. And sometimes we have, stakeholders or other people who might be present in parts of the process, but not all.
Yep.
You taught me something very, very cool, and it was documentation and understanding at each point along the way, each task, each thing that you want to iterate on or test needs to be documented in a way that somebody can jump in without knowing what you've done in the last 3 days and understand exactly where you're at, exactly what this thing is supposed to accomplish and why. And at first I have to say, I was like, I have to document every task. This is insane. So can you share, because it is incredibly impactful and meaningful. Can you share a little bit about the documentation process, what that even means, what it is, and why it's so important?
Yeah, I mean, documentation, it comes up in a lot of different forms. So whether it's like what we refer to in product as a product requirements document or a business requirements document, or what we refer to as epics and stories, which are like the individual chunks of work that the engineering teams are ultimately going to be working on. The most important piece of what you're trying to elicit in that content is why. Why are you doing this? It helps to have those conversations with stakeholders who are maybe not in your orbit, like you said, on a day-to-day basis, but have influence over the decision making that ultimately is going to drive where, the product, the roadmap, the company, whatever, where it may go in the future. So being able to justify, rationalize the what and the why we're doing something and why we're doing it in this order, why that makes sense, I think is really key. And that's where data, both qualitative and quantitative, really help to kind of drive that message home and give you some empirical proof, that the decisions that you're making are founded in really sound rationale. It's probably most people's least favorite part of their job is documentation when you say it like that. What? But I think a lot of product people also like to nerd out on like really diving into like, why is this important, and understanding that the decisions that they're making do actually change other people's lives. Like maybe it makes their work easier. Maybe they can spend more time at home because their tasks now take a fraction of the time that they used to because you've automated some of their workflow. So, there's opportunities to nerd out on it too without it being completely a snore.
Completely. Well, and I think you nailed it, because it's understanding why you're doing something, which implicitly also helps you to understand why you're not doing something.
Yes.
And right. So I have there's a client that we're working with, phenomenal people, incredible company and business and service. And the other day they asked us, they're like, oh, I think, somebody told us we need a thank you page. And I was like, tell me more. And they're like, yeah, well, I think it was our business coach said we need a thank you page. I was like, for what?
Yeah.
And they were
Why?
like, for this workshop. And I was like, do you have 2 workshops? Do you need one thank you page for both workshops? Do you want a thank you page for each one? Like, what does that look like for you? And they were like, oh, I don't know. She just said we need a thank you page. So their why at that moment was, my coach said so.
Yep.
Which means it's time to dig in a little bit to what the ROI would be to create 5 thank you pages, or 1 thank you page, or if you don't need it at all. Right.
Yeah.
And without that, you end up with this laundry list of things that you think you need because somebody else said so, or you watched a YouTube video. So I think that documentation process, and for a solo entrepreneur, you don't have to do the A to Z documentation the way that somebody in a 300-person software company does. But I do think it's important, because you have to understand that where you're spending each of your seconds of the day matters so much more sometimes than large teams, right?
Totally. Gosh, there's a couple things that you pointed out there that I wanted to comment on. One being, if someone, and this happens in large organizations too, the CEO walks over to product and it's like, hey, we have to go do this thing for this client, otherwise we're not going to close the deal. And you're like, cool, I had all of these other 10 things that I already had prioritized. Like, what happens to those? So you run into conversations like that all the time, very naturally, within the course of development. And it's all about understanding that why and coaching other people as well. We talk about like the 5 whys. You keep asking the question why at least 5 times to get to the root cause of the problem that they're trying to solve with the thing they're asking you for. So that's a method in which you can kind of apply to any situation. And you are totally thinking like a product manager, Pua. Like,
I had a good teacher.
The application is perfect. Like, okay, you needed a thank you page. I mean, this came up in the course of our, work together as well. It's like, okay, but why do you have to do it that way? Well, because that's how someone wants it. It's like, well, there are probably other ways, to achieve the same thing, and probably for far less, in terms of resources, cost, whatever, that deliver ultimately a better user experience at the end of the day. And so, like, having the freedom and creativity to propose alternative solutions and like validate the solutions that you are putting into play, I think is critical.
Yeah, it changed my world for sure. And that's like very granular, right? Like that is like, we are down to the little tasks that we're doing to bring big projects to life.
Yeah. Well, and that's true too. Like the other point is, there's this concept of like big wins and little wins or quick wins. Like, you should scatter them out. So at the end of the day, you're achieving something really great, but along the way, people are getting something, some value delivered along the way too, and de-risking those big bets that you're making on big things, so that they aren't so risky in the end when you ultimately deliver them, because you're building up along the way, and validating, again, continuous learning, continuous discovery, validating that what you're doing is the right path to get there.
Absolutely. And I feel like I just got so excited that we just dove right into all the juicy stuff. And I'm wondering if it would help listeners who this feels very foreign to kind of go from like big picture to small picture, what this actually looks like in a real world situation. Maybe starting with because you did mention stories and epics and even roadmaps, and it all does flow together and there's a lot of detail in each step. But could you describe kind of what this overall process looks like?
Yeah, totally. So generally speaking, like within any organization, and again, could be small, could be large, it could be a single person entrepreneur, taking a look at their service or their product offering. And you usually start with like, what is the goal? What are the objectives of your organization? What is your company trying to achieve? Why are they doing it? Who are they serving? And what is my like bet on return that I get as a result of like serving this community of users, clients, whomever, as a result? So you start at the org company level. And then if you have a product or a service offering that is contributing to how you deliver on those objectives within your organization, that's where product strategy comes into play. And the goal of product strategy is that you're not only aligned with the overall like goals of the business, but you can help drive return or advancement towards those objectives of the company at a product or service level offering. And so that's how that all fits in. And from there, all you're doing is saying, okay, how as a product person can I help drive business revenue value for my company? And then you go into that discovery process. What problems are we really trying to solve with our product or our service? Who are we really serving? Like, who's our target audience? Who's our ideal customer? You start to ask those questions. And then you start to identify those kind of smaller problems and build a long-term roadmap that ultimately helps you get to the place that you want to be as an organization through the enhancements to your product or service. Does that make sense?
Totally. Super helpful. And what I really, really love about this is it forces you, you get the opportunity to chunk things down in a way that helps you to move towards goals.
Yep.
Right? Like that's when we went through developing a product roadmap together, it was so eye-opening to see like if someone's out there, and you could have very specific goals, but you could also have big dream goals. Like, I want to write a book. How many people want to write a book? Right?
Yeah.
So, okay, make 2024 the year you write a book, and you can create your literal book as a product roadmap.
Yes.
Chunk it down.
Yep.
And then do what you need to do to get there, right? It's like,
yes.
That's kind of
totally
the scary part.
That you can actually achieve what you set out to achieve.
Yeah, right. They're like, oh my God, then I have to write the book. Holy moly.
Yeah, but you're totally right. And the beauty of it all is that you have the opportunity to continue to inform your decisions and your strategy along the way. Like, you don't wait until you get to the end and then realize like you totally made the wrong choice 12 months ago. Like, you continually get to learn and pivot your strategy as needed based on the new learnings that come along the way, while still delivering value that is actually meaningful. Like, you're never just building things because somebody told you to build them and nobody ends up using them. What a waste of time, resources, energy, all of the things, right? So being able to do things in smaller chunks and adjust your strategy as you go along based on what feedback and learning you're doing it's truly a winning strategy, a winning approach to like how you execute against big dreams.
Totally. And I think that's a relief for people who are more creative minded, because I think this process can feel stringent and very almost limiting. Like if you're like being forced to follow all of these rules, that feels like creativity it's like the place where creativity goes to die. But I think that instead it's the place where creativity gets to have the structure that it needs to formulate something impactful. Because without that,
yes,
right? It's like, well, is this helpful? I don't know, but it's fun. Like,
right.
There's a place for that, but it may not be in business where you want to make money, right?
Yeah. It could end up taking your business because you made a bunch of wrong decisions because you didn't validate the problems you were solving. No, that's totally right. And I always tell people, I am like the least creative person on the planet. Like, give me a pencil or a can of paint, like, you don't want to see the end result. Like, you really, really don't. Musical instruments, no. Like, I'm not creative. However, I would say like product management truly is a creative outlet for people like me. Like, it is my opportunity to come up with creative solutions, to come up with creative ways to solve problems. And design something at the end of the day that is useful and changes people's lives, changes their workflows, makes their jobs easier, whatever it is. Like, it is really a creative space at the end of the day, to be in product, and it shouldn't stifle creativity, but really be, allow it to blossom in a way that actually is productive, you know?
Completely. Yeah. And I think a lot of creatives who turn their creativity into a business are sort of stuck in that space of wanting it to be a creative outlet, which I think is fine. And I think that's kind of like, keep your hobby space yours, where it's something that people aren't, they're trying to like demand products from you based on your creative juices. And for your business, allow your creativity to become a place to make an impact. And you can only know if you're making an impact if you're having conversations, testing, getting feedback, right? It's a loop.
Yeah, 100%. It's a cycle that hopefully promotes not only the creative part of it, but the execution and delivery at the end of the day, right? It gets you to the place where you are actually giving people, you know, what you want to give them, and hopefully what they're asking for at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. Question. In your consulting and your experience in this role as well, what are some roadblocks that you come up against with people who, I imagine this type of work brings up some like limiting beliefs, or people kind of have a hard time wanting to implement this for whatever reason? What are some of those challenges, roadblocks that you come up against, and how have you helped people to work through those?
Great question. I mean, the one that I always go back to, for product people is like, your job is to influence without authority. Like, your job is to convince people that the plan that you've laid out is in fact the right one. But you rarely, if ever, actually have like authority or like managing a team that's actually responsible for delivering, for executing, implementing, rolling out, supporting, whatever. You don't manage any of those teams. You don't manage any of those people usually. But you have to convince them all that the way you've laid it out is the right way to go about something. And that can be so, so hard, especially when you have like either founders who are super married to their way of doing things or their vision for how they wanted something to be done, or you have executive teams that are very, also attached to kind of maybe what the board is telling them to do, or very attached to that thing that they heard from their largest customer. And, despite it not necessarily being overall the right time or the right way of doing things, you have to convince them otherwise. And so that's like the hardest thing. And it's honestly both an art and a science. Like, it's a hard skill to hone, and takes a lot of, let's call it persistence, stamina, being ruthlessly opinionated. Yeah, courage to express those opinions, especially when you feel like you're the only voice in a room saying, let's go left, when everybody else is saying, let's go right, So it's understanding how much flexibility you want, or should be applied, how much, sway you have over the decision making. And one of the things I also learned is, like, actually Gibson Biddle, he used to be a VP of product at Netflix, and he talks about low fidelity or high fidelity risks, right? Like, there's things that are very low risk and there's things that are very high risk. And rarely are we ever making decisions, as individuals within an organization, that are like super unchangeable, like irretrievable. You can't step back from them. So making sure that, like, you reduce those high risk decisions as much as possible by doing little things along the way to de-risk that. And that can also prove like that you are delivering the right things, because you're also getting feedback after the fact. And that goes a long way in helping to convince other people that your approach, your ideas, your kind of path forward that you've outlined are in fact, the right way of doing things, right? But yeah, it's an art and it's a science, and it is hard. It is hard.
That was a beautiful answer. And I think we often find ourselves in those spaces as service providers, right? Because this is what the client wants. This is their vision. And all of a sudden, whether it's through user research, whether it's through data collection, we realize that that is not the best way forward. And so our job is to make recommendations based on data, based on feedback, based on tangible things that allow the client to see that there is a better option that will provide a better user experience that at the end of the day will help them to make a better impact faster and make more money. Who doesn't want that?
Right. Who doesn't want that? Right? It seems so obvious, and yet it's so easy to get caught up in these cycles of like just being beaten down and told like, no, you have to do it this way anyways. And so it's understanding like when to bend and when not to, again, de-risking along the way is the name of the game if you have to go that route.
Yeah. Do you ever coach people around having those conversations?
Gosh, that's really funny. So we're doing my company. I work for a company called the Product Consult, and we're effectively a consortium of product experts who are working on consulting projects like the one you and I did together. And we're doing our company offsite in a couple of months. And they were like, hey, like, is there any like team building or education, coaching stuff that you guys are really interested in? And literally what we talked about was like, how do you overcome some of this? How do you tell people that they're the problem without telling them they're the problem? Like, it is one of the hardest things to do. And so we're constantly learning. Like, I'm constantly trying to find ways. Somebody put it to me once. It was like, when you're running up against obstacles or there's like a big rock in the way, be water. Find ways to go around the problem as opposed to trying to just like hack at it. You're not going to get very far if you're just like constantly banging, your hammer against a rock. But be water. Be flexible enough to go around and find a path forward. And I don't know. That was a very tangential way of saying, like, I'm still learning how to do that.
Aren't we all?
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tricky space. And I also think that without product people or people who are in positions to help those who are in the decision-making seats to make good decisions, we would have a lot more really bad products in the world. So,
totally.
It's kind of like the foundation that keeps the building up. Like, nobody thinks the foundation, but without it, the building doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of examples of like poor products out there, like really bad designs. And you're like, who made these choices? Why on the planet would they ever think that this was the way to go? Like, well, they probably didn't talk to anybody about it. They probably didn't validate that was the problem they should be solving.
Totally. I had this conversation the other day. Yeah. There's like I'm in this group text and someone sent through a bag that they saw in a store. And they had these two emojis and no one could figure out if the emojis meant that they liked the bag or they didn't like the bag. But the bag was super ugly. And so tell us more. Like, what?
Who designed this?
Yes. Turns out like the feeling was mutual, 100%. Why would anybody go through all of the effort to make, like, how did it get through design? How did it get through, like, I mean, the people who make
production.
The bag don't have any influence, right? But production, right? Like, nobody, I guess, in the factory is going to be like, hey, we're getting paid for this, but this is ugly. But it seems like they didn't ask anybody.
There's people that should be accountable for that decision in the organization.
Where's the QA in this?
The classic example I always think of is like parking meters or like pay to park things that have 16 signs on them that say this window is okay, but not this window, but this window is okay, except for in this time. And then you're like, I have no idea if I can park here or not at this time or any time of day.
Totally. And I'm trying to give you my money, but you're making that very difficult.
Like I'm just going to give up on my plans today. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to park here.
Totally.
It's
Totally. Yeah, it's interesting. And I think there's also that kind of mindset of I want to execute, I want to fail fast, I want to learn from my failures. What do you have to say around that mindset versus like people who are just like, they're just going to put stuff out there and see what sticks versus the people who have more of a calculated approach to their execution?
I mean, you definitely can go to the like, I'm going to throw it against the wall and see what sticks. You can. It's going to be a harder, longer lesson to learn that that's probably not the best way to do things, to add value, to, you know, to put your service or offering or product or whatever out in the world. It's going to be a harder road, and you might get lucky, you know, like that's truly kind of it, is like you might get lucky, but you also might not. And you might never make money, and you might never succeed in what you actually set out to do, or you might do it and nobody cares. And I guess if you're okay with that, cool, but like what's the point if no one cares,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say yeah, go the opposite way. Validate, test, iterate, you know, move on.
Yeah. It feels like a good middle ground between that personality type and those who are just constantly stuck in like analysis paralysis. Like,
yeah,
they don't want to do anything because of the risk of something failing.
Yeah.
So this is a beautiful way to say, like, don't waste your time putting things out that don't work. And also don't waste your beautiful ideas and not executing them because you think they won't, right? It's like, yeah.
Try and try again, right? Like that's totally it. There's a delicate balance between the two, right? Don't get stuck not doing anything because you can't make a decision. But also don't make frivolous decisions, you know? That's just a waste of your time and probably everybody else's.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Super cool. Well, I wish that everybody in the whole world had the opportunity to work with you because you make this very tangible, very digestible. You have a really great ability to chunk it down in a way that's easy to learn and understand and to, you know, implement in the spaces that it needs to be implemented in. And I'm curious if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I think I would like to chat more with Talia about this stuff. Is that something that you offer? How can people learn more about what you do and connect with you?
Oh, 100%. I love meeting new people, if only to kind of get to know them and the challenges they're facing. And, you know, also happy to offer the product consult services if ever somebody is in need of product help. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Send me an email, talia@theproductconsult.com. You can also check out our website, which is theproductconsult.com. And yeah, anytime anybody, I will never turn down a conversation, ever. And you never know who you're going to meet and what connections, you know, you're going to make. So anybody and everybody I welcome to get in touch if this sounds like something that could be of service to them.
Amazing. And you also, on a personal note, I know you have traveled the world, and I would love to know two things. One, in this moment, I know this is an impossible question, and I'm not going to ask you, what's your favorite country to visit? Because that is literally like the hardest question to answer. What is a country that you haven't visited that you're excited to go to?
Okay. Honestly, up next on our list is like Zimbabwe and Botswana. Like,
oh my gosh. Is that happening?
We're thinking about it for our trip this year. We did South Africa a few years ago, and it was like an incredible experience. And we've just heard such wonderful things about these other two countries in terms of like safari, the landscape, the biology, like definitely among the top of our list.
Do it. Yes. We did Botswana last year. My dad, my sister, and I.
God.
Yeah. It's awesome because they have like camps. We can talk about it more. I'll tell you everything. But you basically, there's like shuttles, but they're airplanes. And so you spend a few days in a camp that has a specific landscape or environment. And then you take this little like airplane shuttle and you go to the next camp and it's a little bit different. Oh my God, it's so cool.
Okay,
it is the coolest.
I'm calling you immediately for all of your recommendations for Botswana.
Yeah, you'll love it.
That's so cool. I was also creeping on your Instagram and saw you visited Montana not all that long ago, a couple years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Glacier Park. Yeah, that's my home.
Yes. Oh my God.
It
was one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life.
Oh, isn't it? I love it. I mean, not a whole lot of job opportunities, to be fair, but it is, it has my heart forever.
Same. I want to go back so badly. I want to go back in the summer because we went in the winter. We went for a wedding. And I'm dying to go back.
Interesting time to do a wedding in Montana.
Yeah. So our friends, this is so funny. Keep listening if you'd like. My friend's family owns, I forgot what the hotel was called. It's like a little rundown hotel next to a railroad track.
Oh, in Essex? Was it in Essex in Glacier Park? No, I don't know.
Possibly.
Okay.
I'll find it.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you. But it was, so like because they owned it, the hotel usually isn't operating at that time. So like only their friends were staying there for the wedding. So it was really cool.
How special.
It was magical. Yeah.
All right. Well, we can nerd out on Montana and Botswana in our next session.
I love it. Well, Talia, thank you so much for sharing all of this, for sharing your knowledge with me. Again, you've changed the way that I operate my business, and I literally sometimes like use these strategies in my life decisions. So thank you so much for what you do. And I hope that people who got value out of this will reach out because you are a gem of a human and a wealth of knowledge.
No, feelings mutual. And honestly, I was saying earlier, it's like for product people, you rarely get like real gratification and satisfaction. It's definitely not an instant gratification profession. Usually takes a long time to see that. And along the way, everybody's beating you up for all of the other bad things that happened. Hearing somebody say that like the information I've provided has been of use in some little way, is just really special and means a whole lot to hear. So thank you for giving me that opportunity and giving me the opportunity to be on my first podcast. This was like so fun.
You nailed it.
Loved it.
Amazing. Well, thank you. And your info will be in the show notes and we'll chat again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Pooh.